Good evening. Welcome to the Maison Française. Nice to see you all here. We're here to welcome Laurent Jeanpierre, who's going to talk about the autonomy of anger, 10 years of French protests. So I'll just introduce him briefly. Laurent Jeanpierre is a sociologist and professor of political science at the Université of Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne. Sorry about that. That might be someone trying to figure out how they can get in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully. No,
Maybe my friend.
It's not. Okay, usually I turn it off, but I thought we might have someone stuck at the gate. So Laurent's earlier research was focused on intellectuals and politics. And since 2000 or so, his research has been focusing on social movements. He is the author of a book about the Arab Spring in 2011 called Révolutions et crises politiques, and wrote another book on the Yellow Vest movement called Les leçons politiques des ronds-points. He's also the co-editor of a collective volume of articles about revolutions of yesterday, today, and tomorrow called Histoire Globale des Révolutions. And he's currently teaching as a visiting professor at my alma mater, the Institute of French Studies at NYU, where he's teaching about the politics of the Anthropocene. So maybe we'll have a chance to hear about that a little bit too. He's going to speak, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So join me in welcoming Laurent.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm going to speak in English, and I hope you will endure my broken English. Yes, let me figure out how it works. I should do that, I think. Yes. So, as announced, I'm going to talk about some of the social movements, 10 years of social movements in France. Behind me, you have a few examples of these movements, of the most spectacular among these movements in France, which have taken place for the past 10 years. The Yellow Vest movement might be the most known from you, but a lot of other movements here. I only chose the movements which lasted for at least a few weeks, and as you can see, they are quite numerous, and there is also almost one or two movements a year lasting for a long time. So the cliché about France being the country of social movements and street protest is well illustrated by this past decade. You have a few other movements here. And of course, these movements are belonging to a more global cycle of mobilizations. Major interpretations of this cycle of mobilizations around the world for the past 15 or 10 years have emphasized their failure. Revolutions that have failed, for example, in the Arab world, or some writers have talked about a populist moment, lacking organization, lacking strength, and lacking the features when these movements are compared to left social movements of the last century. So in trying to understand these movements, I try to have a more balanced view about the past decade, and maybe a more positive view, less pejorative, less negative. And I kind of interpret this movement, and it explains a little bit the title of my talk tonight. I kind to interpret these movements as belonging to a radical democratic cycle, questioning the party form, electoral politics, representative democracy, and trying to build maybe or to imagine a better connection between daily life and politics. So this will be the main line of my talk tonight. And yes, where am I speaking from? So, as Shani kindly told, I am an observer of some of the social movements of the past decade. I wrote a book on the Yellow Vest movement, in which I participated. And currently, I am working grievances notebooks, which have been opened by the French government during the Yellow Vest movements. I'm not the only one to work on this. We are 10 to 20 researchers working on this currently in France. And I'm also working, I'm trying to contextualize this grievances notebook into an analysis of the protest events in the department I'm living in, one of the poorest departments in France right now, called Seine-Saint-Denis. So this is mostly work in progress for this analysis. So I will show a few results coming from this, but of course, tonight I'm more doing a synthesis than a properly academic talk. So describing these movements, I will make 3 points. The first one is that these movements are more critical of official organizations, not only of parties, of unions, but also they have an ambivalent relationship to the state. Then I will insist on the fact that these movements are very localized and territorialized and interested in local issues. And then I will try to indicate that they are more interested in the reproduction sphere. I will not explain, but I will retell you what it means, than in the productive sphere or the working sphere. Okay. This is not coming from me. Those are statistics about trust in institutions in France in October 2024. And as you can see, trust in political parties is very low, 13%. It's been very low for a long time. It's not changing a lot. Trust in unions is a little bit higher, 42%, and it has increased in the past. You will see that in the next slide. It has increased a little bit in the past years, probably because unions have been very much involved in pension reform protests, which are part of my, of course, of my corpus, if you wish. I'm not commenting on the other institutions. Political parties, 13. Unions, you know, it increased a little bit in the past 4 years, as I told you. So yes, this is the background of course, some of the social movements I'm referring to. And these movements, or these protests, are more often independent of representative organizations. Here you have a slide about protest events in Seine-Saint-Denis taking place 5 years before the Yellow Vest movements. And as you can see, most of them are independent. Some of them are brought by the union, and some of them are coming from associations. But yeah, so the unions are still playing a role, but they are playing a minor role. And of course, the general background, again, of these social movements in France is a more international or transnational phenomenon. Some of the people who have analyzed the protest cycles starting in 2010 I've described. I don't completely agree with this, but it's not a problem. I mean, they have described some of these movements in Brazil, for example, in Chile, even in the Arab world, and maybe the Yellow Vest movement in France as leaderless movements. In any case, as movements criticizing representatives and changing leaders, not having only one leader, but always trying to avoid the concentration of power in one organization or for one leader only. And so this distrust in representation has also some positive features. Again, referring to the Yellow Vest movement, which of course is my main, is the main case I have in mind. Most of these movements, some of these movements, have developed some direct democratic institutions, and especially tried to create some deliberative assemblies. It's not only true among highly educated participants of these movements, which of course are inclined to these general assemblies forms of protest, but it's also true among less educated and more working class people as the one who took part in the in the Yellow Vest movements. And I will come back to the sociology of the movement at the end of my talk tonight. So not only did they create assemblies in many places, but they also tried to create some kind of democratic institutions federating these assemblies and in a form which they invented called the Assembly of Assembly. So it's a complex creation of new democratic institutions, even if they were very temporary. Here you have a picture of one of the gathering called Assembly of Assemblies, and you have a map, I will come back to that, of the different groups taking part in this event. Third symptom of this distance towards representative bodies and institutions. A lot of these new movements have been ambivalent towards the state. They are both, I could have illustrated this point using also some of the demands of the Yellow Vest movement, but here I chose to show you some samples of the grievances which were written in the notebooks I told you about in Seine-Saint-Denis during the movement. The people who took part in, who wrote in these grievances notebooks are not exactly the same as the Yellow Vests. They are a little bit more educated. They are more confident in institutions in a way, but they share with the Yellow Vests participants some of the same ambiguity towards the state. As you can see here, at the same time, they are asking for lower taxes in many ways, and not only for the rich. And at the same time, they are asking for more public services. And so you can have, you have here samples of their own words, even though it's their own words on the notebooks. So they want more investment in public services, but they want less taxes. You have the same contradiction, if you wish, or ambivalence, or ambivalence here. So yes, distrust in parties, distrust or half distrust in the state. Distrust also towards public authorities. A lot of the grievances are referring to civil servants, to high civil servants, and to the way they are privileged people. And as I will show in the next slide, they are more concerned with the privileges of the civil servants and the professional politicians than they are with CEOs or managers in big companies, for example. Here I'm sorry for the quality, the bad quality of this of these figures, but anyway, here you can see. I told you about taxes. It's in French. about public services. So they are high among the grievances. I worked through in a database, but you have a lot of the grievances which are about more asking for more democracy, but also asking for less privileges for high civil servants, less privileges for elected officials. So yes, it's a very important concern. And using another way of reading these grievances, looking for the way grievances create an image of the adversary of the citizen writing the grievance. I mean, it was astonishing for me to see that the main adversary is not coming from economic elites or for economic power, but from political and administrative power institutions. And if you are interested or if you are concerned with the possibility that some of the grievances and some also of the Yellow Vest demands or claims or discourse might have been racist and discriminatory, you can see that, yes, I mean, it's, in some of the grievances, there is also a discourse against minorities. 20% of the one I dealt with this rhetorical analysis. Okay, so distrust in representative and in political institutions. The second feature I wanted to talk about was this local element, territorial element of the social movements. The thing which struck me most when I started working on the Yellow Vest movement was its decentralized aspect, highly decentralized aspect. If you compare this map, which is a map of the main roundabouts where Yellow Vest gathered during this movement in 2018 and 2019, you will see that it's probably the most decentralized movement since 1968, and maybe in some regions, like the one I know, in the southwest of France, for example, since 1945. And so this is not the only case in the past decade. Here you have another map made with other techniques by a geographer, Nicolas Lambert, and it also shows that it's highly decentralized. For France, it's quite rare because most of the, of course, there are a lot of local social movements, but national social movements are usually taking place in Paris, and mostly in Paris and in some of the prefecture of the departments. But in this case, it goes below the prefecture level, and it's much more widespread. Interesting feature, and of course, it goes along, at least for the Yellow Vest, with the idea that the movement is very much anchored or integrated in a locality. And so the idea is that these people are all self-organizing in roundabouts or in other places, creating their own cabins, wood cabins, and organizing collective life for a few weeks before these cabins were destroyed by the government. And if you relate this feature with the number of people involved in the mobilization, I think there is also an interesting hypothesis to make. I mean, most of the demonstrations, the traditional demonstrations organized by unions, for example, around pension reform I was referring to, they expect that they will have some weight on the government because because a lot of people are participating. So their main weapon is the number of people. And of course, there is a huge symbolic battle to assess the number of people who took place in the demonstration. And there is always huge gaps between the number of people assessed by the police and the number of people declared by the unions. But in the case of these new movements, ecological movements also, yellow vest movements, it's not the number which is the weapon. It's precisely, I think, this capacity to be locally invested and locally anchored and to be disseminated. And so I kind of relate this yellow vest movement with other movements which are not in my database, but which have been studied by colleagues, movements that they call territorial mobilizations. And I must say now that this and especially ecological territorial mobilizations. I must say now that these movements, which took place also in the last decade, have been interpreted not as a locally closed movement. You have this expression in the US, not in NIMBY movements. And so the current interpretations of these movements is that they are not closed. They are connected to other movements, and they are not only defending local interests, but they are also defending more general demands. And I don't know if I have time to do that. I won't do it. I won't do it. But because I know I don't have much time. But I would like to just to say one word about the features of this these territorial movements. One element here is of interest to me. The idea, of course, they are distant from political organizations, but they are also saying that they are apolitical, that they are not belonging to the left nor to the right. That in fact talking politics within the movement might be a factor of division. So they are very careful about avoiding politics in a way. It's the title of a famous book of Nina Eliasov, Avoiding Talking About Left and Right. Of course, I see that Shani is afraid of the time, so I'm going fast. This territorialization of social movements, of some of the social movements outside of the unions, again, takes place in a wider cycle of place-based mobilizations all around the world. And it also is connected to ecological mobilizations against new equipments or new facilities, to local, new communes which have developed a little bit in the past decade also within the ecological social movements. And some people even argue, like Philippe Descola, the famous anthropologist, that there is an affinity between the ecological cause, or the climate cause, if you wish, or the environmental cause, and this anchoring in territoriality or in locality. I'm not commenting on the quote, but I'm letting you. So, if you accept these scattered elements, we have our second point, re-territorialization of some of the social movements. The third point is about the themes, the demands of these movements. As I told already, there is a radical democratic demand, less representatives, more direct democracy. Of course, it's not new. I know it's not new. It has existed in many occasions in the past 50 years already. Here I'm looking at the protests in my department. As you can see, protests against against some classes which are closing, or the lack of resources within schools are very numerous. Because there are not many hospitals in my department, it's not so obvious that health issues are also very important, but in other departments they are also coming to the fore. And then housing issues. And then, of course, labor issues are not completely outside of the picture. So my point here is that this is one of the symptoms that issues regarding what feminists and Marxists call the reproductive sphere, school, health, housing mostly, but also care, but also care for the elders are coming to the fore, and these issues are also connected to another question, which is also reproductive in a way, but which has to do with social reproduction on an intergenerational basis. Most of the people who took part in these new movements I'm telling you about are people who are very, how would I put it, very afraid of what will happen for their children. In fact, there are people who have a feeling that the future, the future of their children is really is completely blocked. And so there is this idea that the conditions for social reproduction are not here anymore. So they are connecting issues of daily life and daily reproduction and issues of intergenerational social reproduction. So this is, I think, one of the most interesting feature of these movements, connecting the two: daily life social reproduction and intergenerational social reproduction. This is summed up in this very long slide. And I'm going to, yeah. I said in the beginning that I would say a word about the sociology of this, of the Yellow Vest movement, but also some of the, in the ecological movements, I mean, the people are more educated, but it's, I would say a little word about this. I mean, this movement in particular could put together fractions of the working class and of the middle class who usually don't talk to each other. I mean, one of the interesting analysis of the extreme rightization of French society currently going on has to do with the idea that a lot of the people coming from the working class and the lower middle classes have a triangular class consciousness. This is an idea brought by the sociologist Olivier Schwartz. And so this idea of triangular social class consciousness means that a lot of the people from the working class and lower middle class simply don't want to belong to a group of people who depend on the state for their daily life. They don't want to be assisted. This is the word in French. And so they usually they feel that they are in competition with the assistés to have access to some public goods or collective goods. And so this is, and instead of interpreting their own social condition with an opposition to the upper classes, they are in fact interpreting their own social conditions with an opposition to the assistés. This is not a new phenomenon in the analysis of the extreme rightization of societies. I mean, this phenomenon took place also in Germany in the 1920s and 30s. But the interest I had in this specific movement came also from the fact that temporarily, at least, this opposition between the assistés and the more included people, in fact, didn't take place. Assistés and more included people could gather and took part in common activities, at least for a few months or a few weeks. So I think it's an interesting, interesting feature, and it can help us think about this problem of extreme rightization, about which we might talk in the discussion. I'm really finishing now. So yes, why did I talk about an autonomy of anger? My assumption, or some of the observations I made about these protest movements for the past decade, tends to show that there is not only, but there is a distance, a growing distance between representative organization and social movements. And so I tend to see it as a dualization of politics in France, a dualization which might be commonplace for you in the US, but which is not completely commonplace in France. A dualization between protest movements and electoral politics. In France, the connections between movements and parties was quite strong in the last century, especially within the left. And I mean, I'm not the only one to say that, but I tend to see the past decade as showing that this connection does not exist anymore, but I don't see it as nostalgically. I mean, most of the interpretations I referred to in the beginning of my talk, talking about a populist moment or talking about revolutions or protest movements that failed, are nostalgic about a state of the left where the connections between protests and parties was stronger. And I think, in fact, if there is a connection to create, it won't be the same as the one which existed in the 20th century, precisely because this connection was based basically on labor. And today, if the connection is to be recreated, it should be connected, or it should be built on this idea. The idea is a little bit abstract, on this sphere of reproduction, which is one of the concerns of the protest movements. Of course, there is a remaining question here. We don't know much right now about what happened to the people who took place in these new movements in the past decade. One of the features of the Yellow Vest movement, again, was that most of the people who took part in these movements never took part before in any social mobilization. Some of them even never voted. So there is this element, these people became politicized by the movement itself. And a lot of struggles and movements now are functioning this way. There is a politicization of people by protest movements. And so, of course, it raises the question of what are they going to become? I mean, a lot of people are asking regularly. I'm sure we will have this discussion also, but I cannot answer. I'm saying it right away. Do the Yellow Vest participants vote for the National Front, for Marine Le Pen today? I have no clue. Nobody has a clue to my knowledge. And so, yes, I mean, there is a lack of knowledge about the political effects and also the biographical effects of the participation to these movements in the past decade, and I think it's the next step in the discussion.
That was really interesting. I have many questions, but I'll just ask one to begin with, which is, is there any sense of distrust of the media and of higher education? Because I think in the United States, those would really be two institutions, if you want to think of them that way, that in which there's a lot of distrust. And I guess I'll ask a second question, which is the discontent or distrust focused on political parties only, or is it on the political system as a whole and the degree to which it's not representative of what people want and need, which is certainly part of the discontent in the United States? So, two questions.
Shall I answer now? Yeah, thanks. Yes, of course. In 30 minutes, even though I took more time, I couldn't deal with all the distrusts. So yes, there is a distrust of the media. I mean, there is in the Yellow Vest movements, but also in the ecological movements, in local movements, a lot of distrust. It's very difficult to report on these movements. It's very difficult to inquire in these movements. There is a sense that, of course, the mainstream media are not really showing the reality of the movements. And there has been a lot of episodes where some of the protesters became violent with cameras, with journalists. It still occurs. Some of among the local movements among the local movements I had in mind, there is also this ZAD, Zone à Défendre, this ZAD ecological movement in the West, which took place around Nantes against the airport, and which has become a mode of action in many places within the ecological movement. They are also sometimes burning cars of journalists coming to them. So yes, distrust of the media. Distrust of higher education, is it the same as it is in the US? I mean, I've been here for a few weeks. Of course, I can see this distrust. I think it's a little bit different. I have more the impression that there is a distrust in abstraction, in general discourse, in concepts which are not connected precisely to what I called, but of course it's a 1960s expression, the sphere of daily life. I mean, when you there is an interesting comparison to make. In 2016, there was this long 2-month social movement against a legislative project on labor, and it became a place-based movement. So a lot of people gathered all over the country in places, in big cities, like in Paris they did. And most of them were completely different from the Yellow Vests. Highly educated, coming from universities, a lot of young students with 5-year master programs with them. And one of the main themes of the discussions were about constitutions, new constitutions, very abstract political questions, not about daily life or working conditions. I mean, so I would say that these movements show, these new movements show more a critique of abstract discourses than a critique of intellectuality in itself or higher education. In fact, when researchers come to them and take part in the movement, they are very welcoming. It's true for the radical ecological movements. It's true for the Yellow Vests. They are much more welcoming than they are towards the media. And in fact, it's also something I believe is interesting. If you look at the grievances I was referring to in another sociological section of the population, a little bit more educated than the most of the Yellow Vests, but these people are they like to write a lot and to write also programmatic propositions, but related to their daily life problems, daily life questions. The more abstract they become is about fiscality. There is a passion about fiscality in France. I mean, I'm kidding a little bit, but I read recently the grievances notebooks of the French Revolutions, and the complexity of the discourse about fiscality in 1789 is completely crazy. And it's as complex today. I mean, they know all the taxes by heart. They are able to discuss all the different taxes. Maybe it's a French passion. I don't know. I wouldn't say that, of course, seriously. But this is one. I mean, and I think the only continuity between the grievances of the French Revolution and the grievances of today. Of course, the grievances of today are very different because they are expressed by individuals, and the grievances of 1789 were expressed by an assembly and usually members of the elite taking notes of what the assembly was saying. So those were collective grievances. So very different in kind.
Hi, my name is Muna. I'm a European history and politics student, and I'm also French. Thank you for this presentation. I have two questions. Firstly, I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about the effect of COVID on disaggregating or on pausing the protest impetus or the energy that was there before. And then I have a question linked to the dualization that you speak of protest politics and partisan politics. Do you see a movement of récupération politique by the parties trying to engage and tap into this energy? Thank you.
Thanks for your two very interesting questions. The effects of COVID. Of course, COVID, I don't think only for the French case. I think for the cycle of mobilizations I was referring to in the beginning of my talk, of course, COVID marked, I would say, an ending point, or at least, a weakening point. In the French case, some of the Yellow Vests have been very, I would say the last ones have been involved in the anti-vaccine movements and the anti-mask movements. And so when I said in the last slide that we don't know what they become, or what they are becoming now, it's not completely true. I mean, we know a little bit but very few of them, a minority, which protested for more than a year and continued within these movements. What are the sociological features of these people? To my knowledge, there is only one publication on this right now, and I'm not sure it's fully published. Yeah, most of them are more, I mean, they invested all their lives in the movement, and they didn't want the movement to stop. I mean, one of the features also of this Yellow Vest movement is that it's very difficult to know when it ended, because people continued to gather on a very narrow basis in some localities, in some regions in France. For example, in the southeast of France, near Toulon, where the extreme right is very strong. So it's difficult to have a definitive answer here, but my first assumption would be that, yes, some of these people became very involved in the anti-vaccine and anti-mask movement and are closer to the extreme right. Yes?
Yes, hi. I'm an historian of the age of revolution, so the 18th century and early 19th century, so
yeah.
This is a bit out of my comfort zone, but I found that particularly interesting, the fact that you initially described this movement as a movement that could be part of a radical democracy movement, if I didn't miss the correct formulation you said.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you emphasize the role of anger. And now, that's one of my questions. So what is the actual role of anger? Because there's currently, in the last 20 years, also philosophical debates over the role of anger in progressive politics. And Martha Nussbaum, for example...
Sorry?
Martha Nussbaum, for example, argues that there's no space for directed anger in progressive politics because it doesn't enable actors to get to a political solution where parties can actually enter in dialogue and find democratic solutions because there's already targeting. But there are also feminist critical movements in sense as well, but there's actually one kind of anger that is functional to democratic movements, that is indignation. Here, I couldn't really understand what kind of anger you described, especially considering that if we think about the outcomes, for example, the Gilets jaunes movement, maybe they didn't really serve necessarily the scope of progressive radical democracy. I'm thinking about, for example, the attacks to the civil service. One of the ways Macron responded to the civil to the Gilets jaunes protest was to abolish the École nationale d'administration, (ENA).
Not really abolishing,
but
renaming it. Yeah.
Renaming, but then he says, maybe I abolish it, but also says maybe we should privatize more the state. We don't need these high civil servants. We can just, so which is in contradiction with the demands of some of these movements. So it's a constellation of questions, but if you could come back to the title of your talk, which is the autonomy of anger, and what is the anger? What is that these people do when they're angry that they couldn't do when they're not angry?
It's a very interesting question, about which I must say I don't have the answer because, because yes, I mean the concept of anger or the notion of anger is really the thing I didn't think about enough. You're right. I mean, these questions of the role of affects in politics and the way they can be politicized is something, in fact, in the background of my understanding. I was more interested in the radical democratic element, this General Assembly thing, the conflict between deliberative democracy within the roundabouts and deliberative democracy institutionalized by Macron as an answer to the movement with the climate assembly he proposed, and so yes, this element of emotion, affect, angriness is under-theorized. You're right. It's true. It's completely true. But if I can answer also about the outcomes, and it's also a way of coming back to Shani's question about distrust in the political system. Yes, I mean, this radical democratic element is not only illustrated by this desire for assemblies. It's also illustrated in one of the strongest demands, very ambiguous, maybe, about local referendum initiated by citizens. So there is this idea that we can, that they want more direct democracy in many ways. And about one of the main outcomes to me, and also I think to a lot of analysts, I mean, there is this also the fact that, of course, the movement started about the carbon tax, as you mentioned. And so the result is that I think the question of climate justice in France, because of this movement, are now not only by ecological parties, not only by leftist parties, they are articulated with questions of social justice. I mean, before the movement, climate justice and social justice were two issues which were separated. After the movement, even right-wing parties, when they talk about climate justice, I mean, it's not always the case, but when they talk about climate justice, I mean, they are taking into account the social justice element. So I think it's one of the positive results of the movement. And again, the Climate Assembly was also a way of showing that. But I don't, yeah, I mean, it didn't answer the, the question about angriness.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting. I was wondering, bouncing off of everyone's questions, how do like political parties and specifically the left or like the left coalition of today in the National Assembly capture the demands? Yeah, but in the sense of, since they're so contradicting today, like I know that like la loi d'orientation agricole removed restrictions of use of pesticides because they demanded like fairer trade and cheaper prices. And so like there's so many different demands that contradict themselves. So like how do political parties capture those and make it like a powerful...
It's also the question about political recuperation, which I didn't answer to. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, but precisely because the movement was, because this movement, a lot of these movements, even the radical ecological movement, are trying to work beyond the left-right divide, or are representing themselves as apolitical or beyond politics or beyond traditional politics. It's not easy for left parties to relate to them. So they tried all the different tactics. I mean, in the beginning, I didn't have time to talk about this, but in the beginning, the CGT, one of the main labor unions, and the left-wing parties said that the Yellow Vests were extreme right. And then they said that they were, in fact, in favor of justice, climate justice, social justice. And so they don't know how to relate. And most of the demands of the movement have not been integrated in any political programs or in any everybody is referring to the Yellow Vest, but nobody is really taking into account their own demands. I mean, there is a whole list of demands. They worked a lot on, in fact, creating a list of demands from below, inventing new devices of internal democracy. And so I think there is a very ambiguous relations of the left parties towards these new movements. I mean, they don't know how to relate to them, and they refer to them, but they don't really work on integrating their demands. And I think it's one of the tragedy of the French left, if you want me to go on. I mean, it's one of the problems, I mean, precisely because if you don't deal with this reproductive questions and these daily life questions, I mean, it's the extreme right which is going to take strength from these movements. The extreme right also was very ambivalent. It supported the movement in the beginning because it was grassroots, decentralized. But then, when the movement became violent, of course, it said the movement was not interesting, and in fact was run by a bunch of leftists. So yeah, all the parties are ambivalent.
I wanted to ask you how successful, maybe you already answered it, but how successful have these movements been in achieving their goals? So far, it sounds like you're saying not very. And what alternatives are there to movements? I mean, writing your congressman, sort of minor publications and radio stations or whatever. And then thirdly, you mentioned how the leadership has been, there's not the big leaders at the top, but that's possible because of the internet and cell phones, right?
The leadership, yeah. I see what you mean. Okay. So yes, I mean, for the last question, I mean, most of the people who have talked about leaderless movements in the past decades have emphasized the fact that these movements were not born from social media, basically. In the case of the leaderless movements, it's fully true. In the case of a lot of other movements from the past decade outside of France, it's false. I mean, in the Arab Spring, I mean, most of the movements were built by militants which have been working for years before the movement, which of course intervened in social media, but they were mostly coming from unions, for example, in Tunisia. So I mean, we shouldn't go too fast in assessing or in saying that yes, I mean, social media are creating social movements. I mean, I don't believe that much in that observation. But yes, I mean, there is an element of the movement taking place in social media, on WhatsApp, on WhatsApp also, and it's very difficult for observers to participate in all these spheres. I mean, you can see the physical movement, but if you don't have access to the social media, you see only half of it. I mean, this is quite new for social scientists and historians. Yeah, and it will be new also for historians in the future. I mean, this is why these movements are very difficult to study, because precisely they take place in two different scenes. I mean, not only in one scene. And I forgot your other question, but...
We talked about the use of the internet and the cell phones. The alternative, didn't you want
The alternative. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not my role to give alternatives. But I gave a clue. I mean, in the previous answer. I mean, I think one of the clues is precisely this reconnecting parties to some of the demands of this ecological and grassroots working class movements which took place in the last decade, which are more, which are not only focusing on purchasing power, which are not focusing on labor anymore, but which are really interested in the connection between social justice and climate justice, and in daily life questions, schools, health issues, housing. I mean, and parties are not, even leftist parties are not so much talking about this. To give you just an element, an extra element on this. The main left party in France now believes in social media. Like some of the analysts I was referring to earlier. And so the idea of this party is that you don't have to create, like the Communist Party did in the last century, you don't have to create local cells or local organizations or local groups of the party, because it would be too decentralized. And so you have to remain centralized. I mean, this is a French problem, of course. You have to remain centralized as a party if you want to function correctly. I think it's a big mistake. I mean, if you precisely because there is this, this demand for decentralization, which is very strong in these movements, left parties should decentralize much more and should accept more autonomy of local sections and create new local sections, which they don't do.
Thank you for the very interesting debate here. You were saying that they don't have one particular message because there's.
Can you speak a little bit louder? I'm sorry.
They don't have a particular message because they're so different in their demands, every one of them. But they are very clear about fiscalisation and all that stuff. So that means they are quite educated and well informed. Unlike here, the MAGA people are misled by Fox News. And I understand that Fox News is banned in Europe.
I don't know. I watch it here, but I'm sure you can get it through, illegal means.